Steve Yacovelli. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have the chance to talk with you about leadership and inclusive leadership today. I think this is always an important topic, but I think particularly relevant given that it's Pride Month and given that the nature of kind of the broader societal topics and discussions that are happening right now. And as leaders are trying to consider how can we better be supportive of our people and creating safe environments so everyone can be their whole self in the workplace. For my listeners, Dr. Steve Yacovelli is a hardworking, creative, and energetic professional with over 25 years of experience in learning and development, e-learning management, leadership, change management, diversity and inclusion consulting. He has an MA in education policy and leadership development and an educational doctorate in instructional technology and distance education. He's a published author. Competencies include change management, instructional design, instructional systems design, leadership and organizational development, diversity and inclusion, classroom facilitation, strategic planning, educational marketing and administration, computer-based training, web-based training, SAP, e-learning, professional public speaking, and keynote speaking. A really great background. And many of those things that you are interested in and passionate about are things that I'm interested in and passionate about.
Hey,
yeah, that's always wonderful. Before we move on and dive into our discussion, is there anything you would like to add
no,
to help the listeners get to know you better?
Yeah, John, I think thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the intro. I think to kind of summarize all that stuff is I'm a development professional that wants folks to be better than when I first met them. And that could be whether that's their leadership awesomeness, that's their understanding how to create an inclusive culture, that's the change management piece, whatever that looks like. If I look at the thread of all the experiences I've had, it's really just trying to help people be their best selves. And I think that's a nice way to summarize where my passion is and kind of where I focus my energy.
That's wonderful. That's a great way of framing it. And that's really what drives me too. I want to help people maximize their potential. I want them to be their best selves. And just as a little aside, with your educational background, it just reminds me of when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my educational background. I really wrestled with, I originally came into this space with interest in training and development. And I wrestled with how and where to do that. And I eventually decided, I wanted to keep a foot in the practitioner door, but I also wanted to go the academic route.
Yep.
And when I decided I wanted to go on to do a doctorate, I really wrestled with what kind of program do I do? What kind of degree do I do? And I was really close to choosing the instructional technology, instructional design type of focus, leadership development focus.
Yeah.
And that's largely what I do now, but I ended up doing a PhD in sociology with the focus on work. And then I just kind of moved in. The nice thing about academia and getting degrees is it trains you, right? It gives you certain competencies, but then you can kind of go do whatever you want. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I because I'm from a family of K through 12 teachers. That's kind of what I've always seen growing up. Most of my family are in that world, and I actually started undergrad, or I was going to go to undergrad as a math educator because I math is my jam. I was so excited. And then I did theater in high school, and this woman who was a year ahead of me came back to see some show we were doing. And it's like, how's college? She's like, it's great. I'm a communications major. I'm like, what's that? And she's like, well, blah, 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 blah. We do public speaking and we do this. And I'm like, that sounds more fun than math. So I changed before I even got on campus. And I'm actually so glad I did. Not that I, fault any of my family or our educator friends in the world, but this was a way, I didn't know it at the time. It's where God, universe, Buddha, Allah, insert your picture here, guided me down the right path because I'm still an educator, but I play in the corporate side. And I've dabbled in academia for a while, kind of like a hot minute, I like to say. But I so love the corporate setting. I love the organizational setting, and just the nuance of working it primarily with adult learners, especially in that workplace context, is kind of my jam.
Awesome. And I need to add now that you said math education, because that's what my wife does.
Hey, nice.
So
Love it.
lots of connection points here. Well, that's
Love it.
beside the point. We could talk more about that offline, but today I really wanted to focus on inclusive leadership.
Mhm.
I think it's so important, as I mentioned kind of in the introduction, that we need to create safe places in our organizations where everyone feels valued, welcomed, where everyone has equal opportunity to contribute, and everyone feels safe, and that they can be their genuine selves in the workplace. And that hasn't always been easy
No.
for a lot of individuals. I would like to think that it's getting better and better, but it's still really hard for a lot of people, and there's a lot of work to be done. So maybe let's start off with that, thinking of leadership generally, but
Sure.
how can leaders start to create a workplace that's more inclusive and more safe for all of their employees?
Yeah, it's a great question, John, and it's when I've really been, I finally found the sweet spot, the intersection between all the leadership stuff I've been doing over the years, and then the diversity and inclusion and belonging stuff, and kind of that intersection of what I affectionately call being a consciously inclusive leader. And you hear a lot of conversation like unconscious bias and things, and I used to teach that. Years ago I worked at Disney, and which was a great experience. I was like an internal consultant, and that was one of the topics we would always talk about. And I remember very, very distinctly one of the workshops very early on, kind of in my experience in this particular topic, and we were doing this workshop on unconscious bias. And I remember this person kind of sitting there, back of the room, arms folded, and I'm like, do you have something to share? Yeah, well, if it's unconscious, I can't do anything about it, can I? Oh well. And it really like slapped me in the face, proverbially, like, oh wow, that's a really interesting attitude. Obviously that's not the attitude we want to promote. And so it really just got me thinking about unconscious bias, and I started using the phrase being consciously inclusive, and then of course tailoring that from a leadership perspective, because it starts with the leader. And I define leader, in my latest book, Pride Leadership, I define leader as really anybody who has influence in the workplace. So that could be anyone, as long as you are in the workplace and you actually interact with other humans, you're a leader in my perspective. So when I say consciously inclusive leader, it's not just I have people who report to me kind of stuff, but it's being that mindful leader that says, you know what, how do I make the effort to have others feel included? And if you think about diversity is kind of like the mix of different people, inclusion is the kind of culture where we're trying to include others. So it's being asked to the dance is diversity, and being asked to dance is inclusion. And then you have the concept of belonging, and that's fairly new in the D&I space, diversity and inclusion space. And belonging is now from the employee centric. It's saying, I feel that I belong in this workplace. And to me, that's where we should be going as leaders, is making it so that our people around us, whether that be our direct team members or others, feel that they belong in that workplace, that they're valued, that their authentic selves are honored for that different perspective that they're bringing to the table. And I think that's the cool spot, and really where there's a lot of great work that we can all do together.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm curious, you've worked with lots of organizations on these topics. I've really liked your story about the individual at the back of the room who said, well, what can I do about it? I was in a training session, well, this was maybe 5 years ago now, where a leader brought in someone to do unconscious bias training. And that was like not just one person in the back of the room. It was like 75% of the people in the room were that person,
Right.
and it was just awkward and uncomfortable, and nobody seemed to be, well, there were some people, but most people didn't seem to be particularly open
No.
to the type of discussion that was being had. And so it was sad and frustrating, and I wanted to see more.
Mm-hmm.
So what's been your experience in going into organizations and helping to break down some of those barriers? I like how you frame, that your alternative to unconscious bias, in the walls that people might put up, where you call it consciously inclusive leadership.
Yeah.
But what do you do to help break down resistance and help people get outside of themselves for a moment, so they might be
Mm-hmm.
open to some self-discovery.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic observation and question, because you're right. A lot of people, if you're going on quote unquote unconscious bias training, you're going in and telling people that they're racist or sexist or some ist. That's a really icky place for people to be, but it's the reality of humans. We all have some sort of bias in our world. If you are breathing, if you're listening to this podcast, if you're watching this on YouTube, got to say it, you're biased some way. Now, which biases you have, that's where it gets very individualistic. So one of the things that I found to be really effective, and I being we TopDog Learning Group, there's a pack of TopDoggers, and those puns are definitely intended. But me and my team members, when we do these workshops, what we figured out is along the way, you have to really appeal to head and heart, and that's pretty much for any adult learning experience, but especially when you're going in and saying, hey, you're a blankist, but let's deal with that so you can be more effective in the workplace. And so what we found is whenever we start these conversations with our clients, we approach it from really the three main buckets on why do we care as an organization, as a business, as a non-for-profit. And one is, it keeps us out of legal trouble. Depending on what state you're in, what country you're in, there are certain things that you have to do from an inclusivity perspective to keep you keep you in compliance. To use my legal friend's term. So there's that. Does that make you feel good? No. Does that make your head feel this is good for business? Sure. Then you look at the right thing to do. I mean, this is where the intrinsic value. Hey, you as a human, you want to be inclusive for folks. This is the right thing to do. So now you're appealing to the heart. Okay, that makes sense. And then you say, okay, you know what? Even if those two are off the table, despite how you feel, it's the right business thing to do. And studies prove time and time and time again, the more inclusive our leadership is, our organization is, the more successful we're going to be. And you can define success as money. You can define success as employee retention. I mean, all those whatever KPIs, key performance indicators, define success how you want. But we start from those three buckets and we say, you know what? The legal thing, absolutely, we're not talking that today. The emotional right thing to do for the world, heck yeah, but that's not why we're here today. We're going to focus our energy on the business part. And that's kind of against my heart, how I work, but it appeals to folks because, to your point, John, those people in the back of the room like, I don't want to be here. They can kind of get behind, all right, this is good for business. I'm listening. And then it's just up to us, the facilitators, to sell it throughout. And usually, like, we do this as a one-day kind of thing, pre-COVID times. Will we change people's behavior by the end of that day? No. But will we give them a heightened sense of awareness that they can take and do something else with? Absolutely, we can. And that's kind of the goal we have of the day. I'm not going to make someone not be racist in an 8-hour workshop. That's just unrealistic. And I blatantly say that to the clients up front. But if we can get them at the end of the day to say, you know what, this was worth my time, and I'm now going to go out and do some of the things that Steve and his team told me I can play around with to de-bias myself, yes, then we gotta win on that one.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of research that shows that if done poorly, some of these discussions can actually make things worse, right? It can really it can blow things up, and it can re-entrench people into their biases, into their prejudices. So we do need to be careful with that. I agree with you. I wish that people would just be intrinsically motivated to behave in appropriate ways. But frankly, I don't really care why people do good things as long as they do good things. And if people will just behave well and not behave in prejudiced ways, and try to find ways to address microaggressions and other things like that, then that's a win for the business. And if that means I have to frame it in terms of the business case of diversity and inclusion and belonging for those people that are more resistant, then so be it. That's the step in the door. You get your foot in the door, and then as people start to live it and they start to have more positive interactions with people of difference, then they're able to change their thinking. So their thinking might lag their behavior, if we can put the proper incentives in place, I guess.
Yeah, it's really interesting just kind of to watch how it unfolds. And whenever, I will be the absolute first one who quote unquote sells these to clients that these don't work. Meaning, in and of itself, a one day is not going to change your business to be all of a sudden inclusive the next day. But it's one of, and this is where now we throw on the change management hat. This is the one of the multitude pronged strategy to change the behavior in the business. So yes, it's formal learning, it's informal learning, it's executive sponsorship, it's measurement strategies, it's communication strategies. All of those pieces and parts have to be there. And we always tell clients, we'll do the training part. We can do all the other parts too, but it really takes like a massive approach. Is that something you're willing to do? And we don't engage with clients if they only want to do, when I work for Disney, I work for the cruise line. And I used to sometimes run aboard the cruise ships and dunk the crew into whatever topic of the month was and run away. And I called that a ship dip. So that was more dumping knowledge, not really changing behavior. At the time, that's all we needed. So that was fine. But if you look at systemic organizational change, that's not the approach to take. And I always tell my clients, you're going to promise me that if we're not going to do all these other pieces and parts to make that change stick, you're going to do it. Yes. And they're like, sure. I'm like, no. Sign here on. I'm really serious about that because that means I want to say, I do it as a bullet, but if you did all the other things, it would have an impact. And if you're doing measurement, you're going to see that impact. And so it's a unique way, I think, as a quote unquote training company to approach stuff. But I think for your background and experience, I'm like singing to the choir kind of thing, or teaching the choir kind of thing. So it's fascinating, especially with this particular topic. It really does get to be. You're talking about unconsciousness, and you're bringing that to light. And for some people, like, I'm not sexist, I'm not blanket. And it's just always interesting conversations. But to your point, it does take a very, very savvy facilitator to navigate these landmines because people's emotions can be very high with these conversations. And so you have to really be able to pull that through so that people are in a comfortable space, they learn something, and hopefully at the end of the day, they go out and maybe do a little bit to de-bias themselves.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more specifically about LGBTQ plus issues in the workplace and what leaders can do specifically in creating a better, safer, more inclusive environment for both employees and customers that identify as LGBTQ plus.
Yeah, and so it's you taking that conversation about being inclusive and now focusing it on a specific minority group. So in this case, we'll talk LGBTQ plus. I say plus because I lived in France and it sounds better than plus. I don't know, it's just something I started doing years ago. But
I like
but
that.
one of the things that you can
before.
do at it just sounds better. It's LGBTQ plus, anyway, until we figure out the right way to stop all the letters, that's just kind of my approach for it. But one of the things that I suggest to folks is kind of gets back to that unconscious bias, is to check your biases at the door. And it's those little tiny things you talk about, microaggressions. I use the term micro inequities just because Disney, glass half full kind of mentality. I also don't talk about white privilege in my conversations. I say white advantage because some of those words are just trigger words for some folks. So, but when we as leaders, just start to be mindful of, let's say, for example, the inclusive language I use. So instead of saying to a male colleague, or you're doing an interview, and you don't go down that path of, oh, well, are you married? What does your wife do? And it's those little tiny things that really can be impactful to members of my community. Looking at your HR forms, are they truly inclusive to go beyond the binary male-female kind of thing? Are your images in your marketing materials representative of all different types of families, if that's kind of your focus on energy? So I think it's, as a leader, getting to the mindfulness of looking around and saying, how inclusive are we being in our language, in our assets, in our artifacts, meaning like the stuff on the wall, on the website, and the marketing materials, and just starting to think a little bit more broadly. Couple that with, if you do have members of the LGBTQ plus community within your workplace, ask them what they specifically are looking for to be more included and inclusive within the workplace. And just, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Leaders have a great opportunity to listen a heck of a lot more than I think we often do. And so I think those are probably some of the things to start down that path if you want to be a little bit more inclusive leader within that specific community.
Excellent. And have you seen, particularly with this community, are there any major red flag issues that you've seen repeatedly that maybe you could share with the listeners to help them? I'm assuming people who are listening to this podcast are well-intentioned individuals. They're here because they want to think about things and learn and grow, and if someone is concerned about this and they want to know how they can be a more inclusive leader, particularly for this community, what are some of those elements that trip people up repeatedly that people can help avoid?
Yeah. So what I would say is, so in Pride Leadership, my book, the full name is Pride Leadership: Strategies for the LGBTQ Leader to be the king or queen of their jungle. While it is focused on kind of conversation is for members of the LGBTQ community, what we do is we talk about, or I talk about 6 competencies. See, I have all my swag with me for those who are watching. This is my mouse pad. But these are the 6 competencies that I talk about in the book. And it's over 25 years of observation and kind of all that good stuff. But we talk about authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and shaping culture. And I think to kind of turn it toward the ally leader within the group, what are you doing to, for example, foster an organization that allows people to bring their authentic selves to work? Or what are you doing to be empathetic to some of the challenges that members of the LGBTQ community may be facing? So for example, until 2 weeks ago, as of today, in most states, someone could be fired simply for being a member of the LGBTQ community. A lot of my straight friends had no idea that was out there. Members of my community, we were quite aware. Even when marriage equality kind of happened, the old adage was, gee, I could get married on Saturday and then put that picture of me and my new husband on my desk on Monday and immediately get fired on Tuesday. And that was the reality.
Right.
That so many of us have faced. If you look at the latest statistics from the Human Rights Campaign, I think the latest ones right now, they're just getting the 2019 ones, but in my book I cite the 2018. Just about 50% of queer, to use a general term, professionals are out at work. 50% are not out at work. That astounds me in 2020, or this century, and so being a leader and being mindful of that sensitivity that some folks have, even after the SCOTUS ruling. I'm curious to see if that number goes up or not, because some people now, they're so ingrained in their behavior that they hide those pronouns, that they don't put those pictures in their cubicle or their office. They don't talk about what happened this past weekend and what they did with whom and all that fun stuff. So, just being mindful of that. And I think a smart leader who wants to be inclusive makes it very well known to all of those around them that this is a safe space. This is a place where someone can be their authentic selves, regardless of who that is. And yes, you're going to honor that and support that as a leader as best as you can.
Sorry, I lost my unmute there for a second.
It's all right. Technology. COVID-19
Yeah,
times.
I think that's wonderful, and I truly hope that we can continue to make some steady progress in the right direction here. You talked about the recent Supreme Court ruling, which I was very pleasantly surprised by.
Me too.
I did not see that one coming, and so I was very happy to see that. And that's one step, right? One step down the road of equity and inclusion. But we still need to do so much more. And I get it. It's really hard for people who maybe they haven't had a lot of interaction that they're aware of with people of the LGBTQ plus community. Maybe they grew up in a different time where there were dominant, social narratives that were ingrained in their head that drive some of the prejudices and biases that they have. I get that. But we don't have to feel resigned to that.
Correct.
we can continue to progress and move forward in a positive way, and just respect the humanity of everyone around us. It's not a complicated notion to just treat everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of what their background is, regardless of a whole slew of demographic factors or characteristics. We just treat everyone with dignity and respect. We create a safe place at work where everyone can be valued, where everyone can feel a true, genuine sense of belonging, where everyone has an equal opportunity to contribute, where there is equity. That's what's good for companies. That's what's good for society. And we need to just keep doing the work to get there.
I totally agree with you, John. And I think too, as a smart leader who wants to be inclusive, is take the next layer back and understand the concept of intersectionality. So just because I'm a white gay dude, well, that is part of my experience. My colleague might be a black lesbian. So those different pieces of her identity and my identity shape our individuality. And I think it's just being mindful as a smart leader to not do that broad generalization that all gay men need this, all bisexual women need that, and all trans people need this. And so it's really being mindful. I look at my friends of color, and who are members of my community, but they're going through a lot of different stuff right now, and they have been for times before. And so what is it that I can do as the white cisgendered gay guy to support them within my community and beyond? And I think it's just to your point, let's all just support each other, whatever that otherness means, and just go from there. And sometimes that just starts with how are you, checking in on people and without being intrusive. And then it's, what can I do for you today? And that kind of servant leadership idea, and that's not new to, by me or anything, but just that nuance of it in today's context can go extremely far as being a consciously inclusive leader.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it has been a true pleasure talking with you, Steve. The time has flown by. I wish we had more time. But before we end this episode, I do want to give you a chance to talk about your company, TopDog Learning Group. Yeah. Help the listeners know a little bit more about the company and how they can reach out and connect with you and find out more about what you guys are up to.
Yeah, thanks, John. So as John said at the beginning, TopDog Learning Group is a learning and development, change management, diversity and inclusion consulting firm. We're based in Orlando, Florida, but we have TopDoggers all throughout North America and beyond. The types of things that we do are, pre-COVID, we would go to places and do workshops and seminars for folks. We actually, because of my background in instructional technology, distance ed, the pivot was very easy. We actually have been doing that already. So we have both self-paced as well as virtual classroom type programs that we do on all these topics. We help folks think about being more consciously inclusive within the work context. So that could be like a diversity audit we do and things of that nature. And then really just helping organizations be more effective from a leadership perspective. Those are probably the highlights of some of the stuff they can do. And you can find out more at topdoglearning.biz. We're old school. We don't do the .com, but if you forget and do .com, .com will still get you the right spot anyway, but it's .biz is how we do it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I encourage listeners to reach out to Steve or a member of his team. Look him up. I'll include your LinkedIn bio in the show notes, and just get connected. I really, truly believe this is such an important topic. I mean, the intersectionality that you were just talking about is key. And we're, man, right now, this has been an interesting year. This has been a tough year. And my heart goes out for people of color who are dealing with all of the turmoil right now. But my heart goes out to members of the LGBTQ+ community. And really, we can do better. We need to do better, and we can support each other. And there's lots of ways that we can go about doing that. And Steve, I really appreciate the work that you're doing to help move the needle in this regard.
Thank you, and thank you for being an ally. We all need those allies in all of our groups, so thank you for that.
Well, I try. I hope I am a good ally. Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week.
Thanks, John.